Who exactly is playing tonight in the preseason? Jeremy Swayman contract situation.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, September 24th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. The Boston Bruins will take part in their second preseason game tonight against the Washington Capitals. It's a 7 p.m. start at TD Garden. It will be on Nesson, and you can listen on 98.5. And we have a roster for this game that will include, once again, Fabian Lysell and Georgii Merkulov, both of whom underwhelmed in the preseason opener, a loss to the New York Rangers, and who will be playing together on a line with Mark McLaughlin in an attempt to further or begin to impress Bruins brass as they fight for a spot on the opening night roster. Here's what the rest of the lineup looks like. We have Joey Abate playing with Justin Brazeau and Patrick Brown. Now, these might not actually be the lines because now that I look at it, they are putting these forwards in alphabetical order. At any rate, we'll have Joey Abate in the lineup with Justin Brazeau, Patrick Brown. Trent Frederick will be in the lineup tonight, as well as Brett Harrison, who played very well at the Prospects Challenge in Buffalo and might even be having the upper hand over Lysell and Merkulov when it comes to being the next man up on the big roster. Tyler Johnson will be making his debut in black and gold. Again, he is in training camp on a PTO without a contract, and he is looking to prove that he still has some gas left in the tank and that he is worthy of a contract for this upcoming season. Again, Lysell, McLaughlin, Merkulov in the lineup. Rounding out the forward group is Jackson Nelson, Riley Tufte, both of whom played pretty well in the game against the Rangers, and Matt Poitras making his preseason debut. Poitras, of course, underwent shoulder surgery last season, was limited down the stretch, of course, did not play later in the regular season or in the playoffs. This is his first game action since undergoing that major shoulder surgery, and it will be interesting to see how he rebounds. Every time he is doubted or every time we wonder if he'll be up to the task, he meets it and excels. So I'm expecting a big night here from Matt Poitras, as he is also a guy who's looking to claim a spot on the opening night roster. There's questions about whether he could play third line center, second line right wing, where exactly he fits, if he needs some conditioning down at the AHL level, but expect him to rise to the challenge here in tonight's game against the Capitals. On defense, Michael Callahan will be in the lineup along with Brandon Carlo and Hampus Lindholm. In the preseason opener, we saw what we believe will be the third pairing, Mason Lohrei, Andrew Peeke. Carlo, Lindholm should make up the second pairing. Down the road, of course, we'll see the eventual first pairing in Nikita Zadorov and Charlie McAvoy. Those guys have yet to make an appearance. Ian Mitchell, Jordan Osterley, and Billy Sweezy round out the defense. All three of those guys are fighting for that seventh man spot, which will likely be occupied by Parker Wotherspoon. although he was banged up a bit in the preseason opener, but he came back, literally fought his way back into the game, and he still has the upper hand, I believe, when it comes to that seventh man role on defense. Spessy makes an appearance here. In net, Joonas Korpisalo will be making his Boston Bruins debut. Michael DiPietro getting his second straight, not start, but appearance, as he looks to assert himself as a guy worthy of some consideration when it comes to playing up on the NHL roster. Again, third round pick, highly touted prospect coming out of junior. And when you look at Bussy DiPietro, yeah, Bussy has more impressive stats at the AHL level, but in terms of pedigree, I'm not discounting DiPietro as a guy to look at here moving forward and as a guy who could make some starts for the Boston Bruins this season. The guys to keep an eye on again, Tyler Johnson in his PTO debut. I'm looking at Lysell, Merkulov as guys who need to assert themselves a lot more than they did the other night. Matt Poitras, how is he going to respond in his first game action since that shoulder surgery? And DiPietro, Korpisalo, I'm really looking for them to make some big saves here tonight. On the Capitals side of things, Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be making his Capitals debut after being acquired from the Los Angeles Kings in the offseason. Another former King will be making his debut as well in Matt Roy. They will be deploying some pretty talented youngsters as well. Tariq Periskak, Connor McMichael, Andrew Costal, Hendrix Lapierre, some of these, Ivan Miroshnichenko. These are some of the next wave of Washington Capitals to keep an eye on who could very much make an impact in tonight's game. In net, they have Hunter Shepard and Mitchell Gibson. So I don't really know these guys. Probably opportunity for some of these Bruins upstarts to make an impression and get some shots on net. First of all, we need to see Lysell and Merkulov firing more at will and hopefully popping in a goal or two. Speaking frankly, I traded Matt Boldy in a keeper fantasy league for Kevin Fiala and Fabian Lysell, pretty much expecting Lysell to be playing on the second line to start the season at least. That's not looking great right now, despite the fact that Boldy is injured. So I'm really rooting for Lysell just because of that as well. Nobody cares about my fantasy team, but I like to sprinkle that in. And speaking of fantasy, later on this week, I'm planning to have Mike Amato of Sportsnet and Dauber Hockey to discuss Bruins fantasy options and what you can look for in some other sleepers around the league. That's coming up later on this week. Coming up on the podcast, is Jeremy Swayman panic rising? According to one insider, it's quite possible, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and with the NFL season in full swing, there's no better time to get a big return with FanDuel. NFL fans need to take advantage of this deal that they have going on. If you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And by placing a $5 bet, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with FanDuel at the moment. So all you have to do, go to FanDuel.com, check out the Boston Bruins, betting lines, look at the over-under, put $5 down on their total points for this season, and you can get $200 in bonus bets, whether you hit on that bet or not. Right now, the Bruins are at plus 2,000 to win the President's Trophy, well behind some other teams like Vegas, Tampa, Toronto, New York. Put $5 down, get those $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Please do subscribe so that you never miss a thing. All right, haven't talked about Jeremy Swayman all that much this week for good reason. We have training camp in full swing. There's some games going on, focusing on what's going on with respect to this team and the players that are there. But the contract standoff continues, and according to one hockey insider, it could be more worrisome than we were initially thinking. We have Darren Dreger on one hand saying that, maybe it's closer than it looks in the media. On the latest episode of the Chris Johnston Show, released on Monday, he suggested a 6 or 7 when it comes to level of concern over the situation from a Bruins perspective. Johnston based his guess on a scale going from mid-level 5 all the way to 10, which is full panic mode, which makes a 6 or a 7 kind of concerning here for Bruins fans. He was speaking with co-host Julian McKenzie. This is on the Steve Dangle podcast network. And Johnson acknowledged the growing tension as Swayman's holdout continues. Johnston pointed out that Swayman could sign at any time. Don Sweeney, many insiders have also said all it takes is one phone call for this to get done. But the longer it drags on, the more concerning it becomes for Boston. Johnston said, quote, Swayman could sign later, yesterday or early this morning, be at practice here on Tuesday. There's still time. But, quote, the longer it goes on without any sense of movement, the closer it gets to that panic option. This is a pretty important player after all. Every day that Swayman remains unsigned, the concern meter grows a little bit in Boston, end quote. The Bruins have already begun exploring other options. On September 19th, they signed Casimir Kaskasuo to a professional tryout agreement, which adds additional depth in terms of training camp competition, a backup group that already includes Brandon Bussi, Joonas Korpisalo, Michael DiPietro, and Ryan Bichelle. Korpisalo is likely the starting goalie until Swayman agrees to terms with the Bruins. And Swayman's holdout is driven by his strong sense of self-confidence, according to The Athletic's Fluto Shinzawa, which he released an article on Friday saying Swayman is unwilling to bend to his employer and feels motivated by past slights, including going through the arbitration process last summer. Despite these growing concerns, Elliot Friedman dispelled rumors of a potential trade on his 32 Thoughts podcast, emphasizing the Bruins don't intend to move their promising young goalie. He said he hasn't spoken to Don Sweeney, but his impressions are the Bruins do not want to trade Swayman. Now, the Bruins already moved Linus Ullmark, of course, back in the offseason in exchange for Korpisalo, Mark Kastelic, and a first overall pick. And that was with the intention of making Swayman their bona fide number one goalie. So the Bruins are, of course, not keen on trading him and rolling with a tandem of Bussi and Korpisalo. But Swayman has some leverage here in the fact that while he is a restricted free agent, the Bruins don't want to go into this season with a tandem of Brandon Bussi and Joonas Korpisalo. That would be, I went as far as to say, potentially disastrous on X the other day. I do believe that goalie coach Bob Essensa can and will work with Joonas Korpisalo to get his game up to at least hopefully average heights around the NHL. But it's super concerning. We'll get a better look tonight at Korpisalo and what he's capable of against some pretty talented young Washington Capitals. But at the end of the day, the longer Swayman goes without signing, again, the more panic starts to grow. We were told there was still time until training camp. Then we were told by head coach Jim Montgomery that there's still time once we get into the later part of the exhibition schedule. He doesn't usually play his vets until the later 2 or 3 games of the exhibition schedule. This week alone, we have 4 games tonight against the Capitals, and then they go to New York to take on the Rangers, travel to Philly to take on the Flyers on Saturday. After that, you have 3 games next week of preseason action. So if Swayman isn't signed by, say, Sunday, the likelihood of getting into a preseason game next Tuesday against the Flyers, or one of the games remaining, a Thursday night, October 3rd game against the Kings in Quebec City, or Saturday, October 5th, preseason game against the Capitals, their final tune-up before things get started on October 8th. We face the possibility of that game against the Florida Panthers on the road when they're going to raise their Stanley Cup banner with Joonas Korpisalo in net. And I'm not too keen on seeing that. Now, of course, the ultimate deadline is December 1st. If restricted free agents are not signed by that date, which happens to be my birthday, for those wondering, then he cannot play this season at all. Which would be really interesting, because that would leave the Bruins with a ton of cap space to work with for this upcoming season, but obviously not with their number 1 goalie in the mix. So what do? Are you wanting to go all in and be competitive this year? By December 1st, they might have a good idea of where this team is with their current goaltending. Do they go out and try to acquire a goaltender? Do they use that money and add some more scoring? You can pick up a pretty good player for that with that amount of cap space. Perhaps a rental for the remainder of the season with the view to getting Swayman signed for next year and beyond. That would be a worst case scenario, of course, and it's all worth keeping an eye on here as we get deeper and deeper into training camp. The longer it goes that Swayman remains unsigned, the harder it is to not panic here, because if the Bruins want to be successful this season, again, a huge part of why they were so good last year was the goaltending tandem of Swayman and Ullmark. You take both of those guys out of the mix, yes, their defense has been improved. Overall team defense has been improved by adding Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. But you take both of those goalies out and replace them with Korpisalo, who struggled last season, and with Brandon Bussey, who, as much promise as he has, 0 starts at the NHL level. That is incredibly problematic, and something certainly that we don't want to see. So either the team's going to have to bend, or Swayman's going to have to bend. At the moment, neither is being all that flexible, and there's still philosophical differences, according to Elliot Freeman, on an 8-year deal, with no mention yet of any shorter-term deals to kind of bridge that gap and allow Swayman to grow into the contract that he believes he is worth at this point. So that's the latest on Swayman. He will be featured in an episode of an Amazon Prime doc that's coming out the beginning of October, and we'll discuss his appearance or upcoming appearance in that, as well as David Pastrnak being featured in that doc here as the podcast continues. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. It's to match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. You can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, and connect with candidates faster. And they don't just help you hire faster either. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Boston Bruins. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can also double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. The NHL, in conjunction with Amazon Prime, is going to be releasing a documentary series called Face Off Inside the NHL. And 2 Boston Bruins will be featured on this documentary, with our own David Pastrnak being featured in tandem with William Nylander in episode 1, which debuts on August 4th. It will focus on their close friendship, as well as give an inside look into the first round series meeting between those 2 teams. Jeremy Swayman will also be featured in episode 6, along with Florida Panthers forward Matthew Tkachuk. David Pastrnak talked about his appearance alongside Nylander, saying it was awesome, and he and Nylander have really good chemistry. And Nylander, of course, talked about how the episode for him was an ending because it highlights his his team's being thrown out of the playoffs by the Boston Bruins. It will feature Nylander's heated exchange with teammate Mitch Marner during the Leafs' first round series against the Bruins, one that had Marner throwing his gloves in frustration, Nylander telling Marner to stop whining and just shoot the puck. It was a full-blown controversy. I believe that was in Game 4, where it seemed like the Leafs were done in that series. Of course, they came back and won the next 2 games, pushing it to a Game 7, where David Pastrnak scored the series clincher in Game 7 overtime, in fact. And so that's going to be a fascinating behind-the-scenes look, especially within the context of a long-standing friendship between Nylander and Pastrnak, one that dates back when they were teammates in the Swedish Junior League. And Pastrnak credits Nylander with helping him get used to playing in a new country, speaking a different language, different culture, when he first went to Sweden to develop his game. Now, Nylander was a star there at the time, super talented. Pastrnak says he was way better than him at the time. And his English wasn't great. They couldn't talk much, but he was very helpful, trying to help him with English, Swedish, and they eventually got to play together. They let their play do the talking amid those language barriers. They became close friends and had really good chemistry. That fueled a dream of Nylander coming to play with Pastrnak in Boston, but of course that went by the wayside when Nylander signed a contract extension with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Pastrnak, Swayman will be featured along with Colorado Avalanche captain Gabe Landeskog, who missed all of last season Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman of the Edmonton Oilers, Matthew Tkachuk of the Panthers, Philip Forsberg from Nashville, Rangers captain Jacob Trouba, Canucks captain Quinn Hughes, and Golden Knights forward Jack Eichel, among others. It's going to be a very fascinating behind-the-scenes look, and I can't wait to watch episode 1, which will debut on October 4th, and you can be sure that I will do a full review of that episode and anything that pops from the Bruins appearances on there. One of my favorite podcasts is The Watch from The Ringer, which features Chris Ryan, Andy Greenwald. They like to break down their favorite TV shows, Industry being one of them, and I'm going to try to do something like that with respect to this documentary. That's it for today's episode, my friends. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope you are all having a great week. You are taking care of yourselves, taking care of each other. Next, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, all the latest from our local experts around the Locked On podcast network, which brings you your favorite teams every single day. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk about all the storylines, stats, and signals from tonight's preseason game against the Washington Capitals. See you later, friends.